We are very happy and delighted to welcome Graham Ashton today as our first guest speaker. Graham is the External Affairs Manager EMEA Esport at Riot Games, and he will give us a short overview of the VCT ecosystem in 2023. With that, Graham, stage is all yours.
Okay, thanks very much, Moritz. Thanks very much for tuning in today. Before I get into my presentation, I just want to say thanks to SKW Schwarz for inviting me to speak. Myself and a few colleagues at Riot have actually been watching the esports lunch lectures for a while. We always find them highly informative, and I hope we can offer the same experience for everyone tuning in today. So I'll be providing an overview of the Valorant Champions Tour, or VCT, for 2023. I would assume most people engaged in esports are aware of Valorant as a game title, but as is often the case with developing esports games, maybe there's not so much familiarity with the various leagues and tournaments and how they're structured. And 2022 was really a transition year for the circuit. And 2023 will mark quite a massive expansion and next stage for the competitions. So I think at the beginning of this year, it seems like the best time to start and walk you through those competitions at various tiers, and also talk you through why we think Valorant has the potential to be the premier FPS esport moving forward. Based on previous esports lunch lectures, I would assume most people here are aware of Riot Games. For those who maybe don't know so much about the company itself, we're a global games publisher founded in 2006 with the aspiration to be the most player-focused game company in the world. Today, there are over 3,000 Rioters working out of 20 plus offices worldwide, with our headquarters being in Los Angeles. You can see a picture of most of those Rioters there. I'm somewhere in that photo. I haven't quite figured out exactly where. So while for the majority of our history, we're focused around one game title, League of Legends, today we are a multi-game company focused around three core pillars. Our core pillar is games, and it will always be games, but we also have entertainment, which maybe many of you experienced through our Emmy award-winning series, Netflix series Arcane, and also esports. And for esports, esports isn't just a form of marketing for the games. Of course, there is a marketing component to it, but we don't just simply run a few competitions throughout the year. We actually have a global connected regional circuit of multiple competitions, many of which qualify into each other. It's something that we actually use as an opportunity to celebrate our fandom and basically deliver something back to our fans and build, obviously, competitive aspiration around our competitions. So in terms of the actual operation of esports, we have many offices worldwide that are focused on esports specifically. For EMEA, that is an office in Berlin. We actually have two offices in Berlin, one dedicated to local publishing, but another in Adlershof that is 100% focused on esports. It's located next to Studio Berlin, where we regularly broadcast the League of Legends EMEA Championship, or LEC, and various other competitions, including Valorant in the past. What's worth noting is that the office is responsible for esports for the entire EMEA region. So we work with other Rioters in Dublin, Reading, Istanbul, and Dubai, to name a few. You may be familiar with many of our game titles, particularly League of Legends, which remains one of the most played PC games worldwide. When we celebrated its 10-year anniversary, we took the opportunity to introduce new titles in the Runeterra universe, but we also introduced Project A, which would later become Valorant, which is our first IP outside it's our first original IP, you could say. I won't go too much in detail in terms of Valorant, the game, but the general gist of it is a 5 versus 5 first-person shooter that combines elements of the tactical shooter genre, which tends to include things like realistic movements, ballistics, squad-based styles, a low health damage model, with that of the class shooter, which will feature selectable characters that have distinctive abilities or weapons that are specific to that character. I think one of the key selling points of Valorant is that it's obviously built around a lot around communication and teamwork, but also the majority of the agents have corresponding real-world nationalities, and that provides a sense of cultural familiarity to our players as well. So turning to esports, we launched the first full season of the Valorant Champions Tour, again VCT, in 2021. Originally, it was comprised of a set of interconnected tournaments, but in its current state, it can best be described as having various tiers of regional leagues, which in the turn provide qualifying opportunities to two brands of major international tournaments. That's the Masters, which takes place multiple times per year, and the Champions, effectively the World Championship of Valorant. We broadly divide the esports competition into 3 regions, or you could even call them super regions. That's the Americas, EMEA, and Pacific. Each of which features their own various regional competitions, which in the past have mostly played out the majority of them online, and these encompass a number of different countries within those individual regions. It was announced quite recently that Valorant received the necessary game license to launch in China, which will be integrated into the future. The Pacific region currently does not include China. Based on its size and sub-regions, we basically give each of these regions like dedicated qualifying slots in international tournaments, which to date have taken place in Iceland, Denmark, Berlin, and Istanbul. One of the most interesting things about Valorant, in my opinion, is among all the esports titles, it probably is the one with the greatest degree of parity between the competing regions. So we haven't seen one region become totally dominant. And in fact, if you look at the semifinals for Champions last year, we had the four teams in the semifinals were all from different countries or sub-regions. And in fact, we even see countries or teams emerge from regions that you wouldn't normally associate with high-level esports play, like Japan or Singapore, for example. So it's very much a global esport, and that is how it was conceived from the beginning. So that means there's also a lot of synergy between the game's development team and esports competition, including the launch of specific competition tie-in game items. So for example, for Champions 2022, we launched a skin collection where 50% of the net proceeds were shared with the qualified teams, the total actually being over $60 million US dollars. So for 2023, this structure of regional to international play will stay intact, but with several major evolutions. If we look at the kind of pyramid visualization for the EMEA region, once again, champions will be at the top, with masters effectively creating ways to qualify for champions. Like one thing I'll point out is that we tend to have multiple masters events throughout the year, and usually coming first in masters gives you a guaranteed qualification to champions, but there are other methods, of course, to qualify for the main event. Where the biggest change is going to happen is everything that happens regionally below that. So we are now introducing what we call international leagues. There'll be three, one for each of the three regions, and these will be the only way to qualify then for the international tournaments. I will go into more detail about that in just a moment. The lower tiers of the pyramid, then we have challenger leagues, which are an evolution of regional leagues that we ran last year. We also have game changers, which is sort of a supplement to the competitive season that offers a path to pro initiative for women players. And then below that, we have various amateur and grassroots tournaments, also some maybe attached to the collegiate scene as well. So I'm going to start breaking down some of these layers. So if we look first at the EMEA International League, this will be an entirely new competition that we'll be launching this year. Whereas regional competition in the past, or in 2022, was online, the international leagues will be entirely land-based, played out of a central hub city. So for EMEA, this is going to be an entirely new studio that we're setting up in Charlottenburg in Berlin. The 10 teams that will be competing in there are long-term partners in the league. They were selected after several months of basically application. So this included a written application, in-depth interviews with the teams, and financial reviews. And the teams were selected, the teams we ended up choosing kind of shared our values, have a strong connection with their fans, and they built for the long term with a focus on sustainability. Their actual competitive history wasn't necessarily a factor in why we brought them in. There was also no preference or quota given to any particular country in the selection process, but you can see that among the selected teams, some of the more recognizable esports organizations from countries like Spain, France, or Turkey. So the inaugural, in a typical year, we'll have multiple splits for this league, but for this year, we're doing it a little bit differently. The inaugural split will take place in March. In the meantime, we're going to launch a one-time kickoff event in Sao Paulo, Brazil next month. That will feature all 30 partner teams from the 3 international leagues plus 2 invitational teams from China. This kickoff event will kind of give us insight into who won the off-season, but in addition, the winning team will also get an additional slot at the Masters tournament. Masters this year, there's going to be just one, but it's going to be taking place in Tokyo, which would actually be Riot's first international esports event to take place in Japan, because Valorant has found a very passionate community in Japan. It has really taken off there. The winner of, as I mentioned before, the winner of Masters qualifies directly for Champions, and the international leagues will provide championship points to allow other teams to qualify, and we will also have a last chance qualifier later on in the year. So that covers the top layer of competition. As I said before, in 2023, we're expanding our regional league concept, which actually started in EMEA. We're now expanding that worldwide. So each of the 3 super regions will have a variety of challenger leagues as sort of the tier 2. Some of those have already begun play already, and there'll be 2 separate splits for challengers this year. In EMEA, we will have 9 challenger leagues. Some of them specifically focus on countries like Spain or France, while others cover multiple countries like Northern Europe, MENA, or Eastern Europe. Each of these have unique brands tailored to those markets, but they all have a standardized format and competition policies. I think the most exciting aspect of these competitions is that we're introducing something called the Ascension Tournament. So about halfway through the year, the best performing teams of each Challenger League will qualify for the Ascension Tournament. And then the winner of the Ascension Tournament for each of the 3 regions will then get a 2-year entry into the International League, where they will share in similar benefits as the rest of the partner teams. After those 2 years, they will return to the Challenger circuit. And I think in 2025, we're going to start actually bringing in 2 teams from challengers into the international leagues every year. So this essentially creates a fully open ecosystem where it is possible to basically be, a ranked player to go from there all the way to champions, even though that is, a Herculean task. The challenge, whilst all the international tournaments and the international leagues are directly run by Riot with production partners and other vendors, the Challenger Leagues are run with third-party esports tournament organizers in those respective regions, many of whom we've worked extensively in the past on League of Legends, or even to run regional broadcasts of our international events. The Riot basically, you could in a sense say these are Riot sanctioned leagues in the sense that they adopt our competition policies, they fit into our schedule, and that they are standardized to an extent. But each of the tournament organizers is able to kind of build out their own individual product from that sense. I think for this particular audience, it'd be quite interesting to know, like, from terms of policies, what does that mean? The competitions will follow our general same structure that we've introduced in League of Legends, where every competition will have its own individual rulebook, whether it's the EMEA League, Challengers as a whole, or Game Changers. There'll be an individual rulebook for those. We haven't yet made the 2023 rulebooks publicly available, but if you're interested, I would definitely suggest looking up the 2022 rulebooks, and many of the same competition policies and general operations of the competitions remain similar. I always tell people to read esports rulebooks. It's like the easiest. It's very important to understand how competitions are run specifically compared to traditional sports. In terms of financials, one of the big differences between the EMEA League and, let's say, the LEC as well. In the LEC, the partner process involved an upfront payment from teams to participate in the league. We are not requiring that of the teams this time. Instead, that in kind of return for the investment that the teams will be providing in growing the ecosystem, obviously building operations in their hub city, we will be providing them a financial stipend. And like many of our top leagues, there will be a minimum salary, which in EMEA will be 50,000 euros per year. Every team that participates, and again, this is detailed quite extensively in the rule books, must follow our eligibility criteria. To summarize some of them, this includes the age of the participating team member, their work eligibility from the region they're competing in, and certain ranking requirements. Their game accounts will also be subject to anti-cheat and behavior checks as well. We do have a residency policy for Valorant, as in our other games, but it is slightly different. For example, if you look in League of Legends, we have 9 different regions, whereas in Valorant we have 3 main regions, but the general principle is the same, that teams must have a minimum of 4 residents from their region in their full roster. Interestingly, EMEA is the only region to have that doesn't look like it will have any outside talent coming in this year. When it comes down to challenges, it's a little more complicated. We have what's called the locally trained residence policy. It's not simply a thing that, let's say, because you're French, that means you are a resident of the French league. It's based more around your citizenship, but also your current residency, but also your competitive history. It generally gives each challenger league a kind of overall representation of the area that it's supposed to be covering competitively. The last thing I want to go over, but certainly not the least, is our Game Changers initiative. So we launched this in 2021, basically to give opportunity and exposure for women and other marginalized genders within Valorant esports. Designed really to highlight the diversity of Valorant's player base on a global scale. So after 2 annual seasons, I would say now that a majority of the major esports organizations now field a team competing in Game Changers, either in addition to their main VCT squad, or as we're seeing now, as their main VCT squad, which is fantastic. We have regional Game Changers events, which provide various qualifying methods into a global championship. And there are obviously many metrics of success for this particular product, but the main goal we want to see is for more diversity within the top level Valorant rosters. We would love to see more women being signed to VCT teams, and we think that this is a great way to achieve that. I think Game Changers itself has also become a very engaging competition brand for fans. We held the first global championship in our Adlershof studio last year. The team that won it is probably actually one of the most competitively consistent teams in Valorant, G2 Gozen. They delivered the first ever reverse sweep finals, and in terms of viewership, it was by and large the most watched female esports event of all time, which is fantastic. I guess I'm a little low on time, so just to give a little bit of overview of how we're expanding Game Changers next year, we just essentially want to create more opportunities for individual players to not only compete, but also to gain competitive training experience. We'll be expanding the Game Changers EMEA League to 16 teams, with fighting back the 4 top teams of last year. We'll be introducing a Contenders series, which will allow teams to qualify up into the top league. We'll also be providing different ways for teams to gain competitive experience and education in a community setting as well. So yeah, that's a pretty brisk run through of the VCT system. If you want to keep up to date, we have various social channels, both for VCT as a whole. We have ValorantEsports.com. But of course, if you also want to, I will also just plug myself. I'm basically on social media, always posting about politics and esports, which is my focus. So if you're always interested to know there, please also give me a follow. But yeah, happy to welcome any questions or clarifications on anything.